When the HOA lawyer showed up on my porch with a $17 million lawsuit, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. Then I read the claim. They were holding me responsible for a flood that destroyed 25 homes. And the worst part? The lake that caused it wasn't even mine. You know that feeling when your entire world shifts under your feet, when something so absurd happens that you can't tell whether to laugh or scream? That's exactly how I felt the morning I found that thick envelope wedged between my storm door and the frame. It was one of those crisp autumn mornings in North Carolina, the kind where the fog rolls off the lake like steam from a pot, and the only sounds are ducks gliding across the water. I loved mornings like that. Peaceful, quiet, mine. I had bought the property years ago, a couple of acres of land and an old cabin right on the lake's edge, long before the subdivision popped up next door. Back then, it was just woods and water, my personal escape from the chaos of life. But then came Lakeside Estates, the HOA-controlled neighborhood that decided to build rows of luxury homes around their lake. Except it wasn't their lake. The lake was natural, part of the land deed I'd bought decades ago from an old farmer. At first, the homeowners seemed friendly enough. But then came the rules, the meetings, and the endless letters from the HOA board claiming the lake was communal property. I ignored most of it, until the day the dam broke. It happened after 3 days of solid rain, one of those storms that make you feel like the sky's falling apart. I was sitting inside, nursing a cup of coffee, when I heard the crack, that deep, thunderous sound of wood and earth giving way. By the time I got to the window, the new dam the HOA had built to beautify the lake was collapsing. A wall of muddy water rushed down toward the neighborhood below like a freight train. It took less than 5 minutes for the water to wipe out 25 homes. I stood there, powerless, as fences disappeared, cars floated down the street, and people screamed in disbelief. I'll never forget that sound, that raw panic. For weeks, the community was chaos. News vans parked at the corner of Lakeside Drive, reporters shouted into cameras, neighbors were demanding answers, crying in front of the wreckage of their dream homes. Then one morning, when I was out inspecting my property line, a man in a blue suit walked up my driveway. He had that cold, rehearsed smile that only lawyers wear. "Mr. Tanner," he asked, flipping open a leather folder, "I'm here on behalf of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association." I nodded, warily, and he handed me the thick envelope. "You're being served." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. "You've got to be kidding me." "He assure you, sir, this is no joke," he said flatly. "The HOA holds you responsible for the maintenance and structural integrity of the lake. The failure of the dam caused catastrophic damage to HOA property. We are filing for $17 million in damages." I stood there, mouth open, the words echoing in my head like a bad dream. $17 million? I repeated. For their dam? The lake is part of the shared ecosystem of Lakeside Estates. As such, your negligence directly contributed to the disaster. I stared at him, my voice rising. My negligence? I didn't build that damn dam. They did. He didn't flinch. "Sir, we'll see you in court." He turned, adjusted his tie, and walked away, leaving me standing there in the morning sun, shaking with disbelief. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with that lawsuit spread out in front of me. The legal jargon was thick, but one thing was clear. They were trying to pin everything on me. According to their claim, because the original lake was technically on my property, anything that happened to it, including the dam failure, was my responsibility. But here's what they didn't know. I still had the original deed, signed in 1978, stating clearly that the HOA section was leased, not owned. The moment they built that dam, they overstepped the boundary, and I had the paperwork to prove it. As I sat there staring at the old deed, yellowed from age, I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about pride, power, and the arrogance of people who thought they could take anything they wanted just because they had an HOA behind them. Well, they were about to learn that I wasn't some pushover cabin owner. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one.
You ever get that sinking feeling when you realize someone's not just trying to mess with you, they're trying to ruin you? That's what hit me about a week after the lawsuit landed in my hands. At first, I thought it was a bluff. I figured no sane lawyer would actually push a $17 million claim on a private homeowner over a lake that clearly wasn't theirs. But I underestimated one thing: HOA arrogance. They didn't just file the lawsuit, they launched a campaign. The first sign came that Monday morning. I drove into town to grab groceries, only to find the local paper sitting on the counter with a headline that made my stomach twist. Lakeside Estates homeowners sue neighbor over dam collapse. There was my name, Daniel Tanner, 52, owner of property adjacent to Lakeside Lake, accused of negligence leading to destruction of 25 homes. They made it sound like I'd caused the Great Flood of North Carolina single-handedly. The cashier, a kid I'd known since he was little, just gave me that awkward look. "Hey, Mr. Tanner, tough break." Yeah, tough break. By the time I got home, I had 3 voicemails from reporters, 2 from lawyers I'd never heard of, and 1 from my insurance company politely informing me they weren't responsible for intentional negligence. Intentional negligence. The word stung. I spent that evening pacing my living room, my boots creaking against the old wooden floor, trying to make sense of it all. That's when my neighbor, Mark, one of the few decent guys from the HOA community, knocked on my door. He looked uneasy, clutching a manila folder. "Dan, you got a minute?" "Sure," I said, waving him in. "What's going on?" He set the folder on my table inside. "You didn't get this from me." Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, between the HOA president, Victoria Greer, and several board members. The subject line on one caught my eye: establishing Tanner's liability. I skimmed through the first one and my jaw clenched. They weren't just trying to sue me, they were fabricating evidence. They were telling homeowners that the original dam, the one I supposedly failed to maintain, had existed before their construction, even though their own contractor had built the new structure less than 2 years ago. Mark leaned on the table. "Dan, Victoria's been telling everyone you refused to let the HOA repair the dam, that you ignored multiple notices. She's painting you as the villain." "Huh, notices? They never sent me a single damn letter." "Oh, they did," he said quietly. "They just backdated them." That night, something changed in me. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. I pulled out every file I had: land surveys, old property deeds, lake maintenance records. I even found photos from 20 years ago showing the shoreline before any of those cookie-cutter houses existed. My hands trembled as I looked through the evidence. I had proof of everything. But I knew it wasn't enough to just defend myself. I had to expose them. So I made a call to an old friend, Rachel Porter, an environmental attorney who'd helped me with a zoning dispute years back. When she picked up, her voice was calm but sharp, the kind of lawyers get when they smell blood. "Dan, it's been a while. What's going on?" I told her everything. The flood, the lawsuit, the fake notices. She listened silently until I finished. Then she said, "They're not just coming after you for money. They're trying to seize ownership. They want your land." I froze. "What?" She said, "Think about it. They can't legally build anything else on HOA property near the lake, but if they prove the lake's yours and that you neglected it, they can push for court-managed liquidation. They'll settle for ownership of the land in exchange for dropping the damages." It hit me like a punch in the gut. They weren't suing me for $17 million because they wanted money. They were using it as leverage to take my property. Rachel agreed to take my case, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a fighting chance. We met 2 days later in my kitchen, spreading paperwork across the table. "This deed here," she said, pointing to a faded line on the 1978 document, "is gold. It clearly states that the natural boundary of the lake lies within your property, and that the HOA's future development would only be allowed under lease agreements. If they built a dam without your consent," I finished, "they broke the law." "Exactly." She gave me a tight smile. But we'll need more. The court won't just take your word for it. We need expert testimony. Engineers, surveyors, maybe even environmental specialists. That's going to cost money, I said grimly. Cheaper than 17 million, she replied. A week later, the first court hearing was scheduled. The HOA came in like a small army, 5 board members, 2 lawyers, and Victoria herself, wearing a pearl necklace and that smug expression of someone who thinks they've already won. When she saw me walk in with Rachel, her smile faltered just a little. As we sat down, she leaned over the table. Dan, I really wish it hadn't come to this. You could have avoided all this trouble by cooperating. I met her gaze coldly. You built the dam on my land without asking, Victoria. You caused the flood. Her lips curved upward. That's for the judge to decide. The first session was short, just statements and evidence submissions, but the tension was suffocating. The HOA's attorney, a slick guy named Keller, tried to paint me as a neglectful landowner who failed to maintain a shared reservoir. Rachel stood, poised and confident. Your Honor, she said, holding up the original deed. My client's property is not and has never been part of Lakeside Estates. The HOA's dam was built without permit or authorization. If anyone's liable for damages, it's the HOA itself. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victoria's face went pale. Keller tried to object, but the judge motioned for silence. Miss Porter, you'll submit that deed into evidence. Yes, Your Honor. When we walked out of the courthouse that day, Rachel turned to me and grinned. You should have seen their faces. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Feels good to be the underdog. Just remember, she said, they're cornered now. Cornered people do stupid things. I didn't realize how right she was until what they did next. If you've ever been in a fight where the other side starts to lose, you know the feeling, that moment when they stop playing fair. That moment came fast. After the first hearing, word spread around Lakeside like wildfire. Suddenly, the same neighbors who used to wave when I drove by started closing their blinds when they saw my truck. The HOA had turned the entire community against me, and they weren't done yet. 2 days after the hearing, Rachel called me early in the morning. Dan, you better sit down. I was already nursing my second cup of coffee at the kitchen table. That bad, huh? They just filed a new claim. They're alleging intentional sabotage. I nearly spit out my coffee. Sabotage? Of what? The dam, she said flatly. They're saying you tampered with it, removed structural supports before the flood. My heart dropped. That's insane. They built that dam without me even knowing. How could I sabotage something I didn't have access to? That's what we'll prove, Rachel said. But they're bringing in a new witness, someone claiming to have seen you near the dam the night before it broke. I frowned. Who the hell would say that? She paused. A man named Mark Carter. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Mark? I repeated. My neighbor? Mark? Yeah, that's the name. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. Mark, the same guy who'd slipped me those HOA emails, who told me he was on my side, was now testifying against me. I called him immediately, but it went to voicemail. I drove over to his place that afternoon, but his wife answered the door and wouldn't meet my eyes. He's busy, Dan. Please don't make this harder. Harder? I snapped. He's lying about me in court. She closed the door without another word. For the rest of the day, I just sat in my truck staring at the lake, watching the ripples move across the surface like ghosts of everything I'd lost. Why would he do this? Was he threatened? Bought off? Rachel tried to calm me down. It's not over. We'll cross-examine him. But this changes things. We need proof he's lying. The next hearing was brutal. The HOA's lawyer, Keller, strutted into the courtroom like a man who'd already won. He called Mark to the stand first. I couldn't look at him. Mark took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he swore in. He looked older somehow, like guilt was eating at him from the inside. Mr. Carter, Can you tell the court what you saw on the evening of June 3rd, the night before the dam collapse? Mark nodded slowly. I saw Dan Tanner near the dam around 9 p.m. He had a flashlight. He was kneeling by the west side near the support beams. A murmur ran through the crowd. I clenched my fists under the table. Rachel rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. No photographic or physical evidence has been submitted to support this claim. Keller smirked. We're simply establishing witness testimony. The judge allowed it. Rachel cross-examined him next. She was calm, surgical. Mr. Carter, how far were you from the dam when you allegedly saw my client? Maybe 50 yards? At night? Yes. With a flashlight? He nodded. She tilted her head. And yet, despite the darkness, you're certain it was my client? He hesitated. He was wearing the same jacket he always wears, brown canvas. Rachel glanced at me, then back at him. Mr. Carter, are you aware that half the maintenance crew wore identical jackets during the flood response? He froze. She pressed harder. You didn't see Dan Tanner that night, did you? I'm not sure, he stammered. Did someone from the HOA speak to you before your testimony today? Keller jumped in. Objection! The judge raised a hand. Overruled. Answer the question. Mark swallowed. Yes? Who? He looked down. Victoria. The courtroom gasped. Rachel nodded slowly. No further questions. That should have been the end of it, but Keller wasn't done. He pivoted the case in a direction none of us saw coming. When the judge asked if the HOA had further evidence, Keller produced a USB drive. Your Honor, we have security footage obtained from a neighbor's camera, time-stamped June 3rd, showing a vehicle matching Mr. Tanner's truck heading toward the dam at 8:59 p.m. Rachel immediately objected. That footage was never disclosed during discovery. It's inadmissible. Keller shrugged. We received it yesterday. The judge allowed it. For review only. The footage flickered onto the courtroom monitor. The quality was terrible, grainy and dark. It showed a truck driving down a dirt road toward the lake. It looked like my truck. Same make, same color. I felt my pulse pounding. That's not me, I whispered. I was at home all night. Rachel turned to the judge. Your Honor, my client's home security logs show motion inside his residence between 8:30 and 10 p.m. We'll submit them as evidence. The judge nodded. Submit it. Still, the damage was done. You could feel the doubt seeping into the room like poison. After the hearing, I found Mark in the parking lot. He was leaning against his car, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. When he saw me, his eyes darted away. Why'd you do it? I asked quietly. He exhaled smoke, not meeting my gaze. They came after my wife, Dan. They said they'd foreclose if I didn't cooperate. I'm sorry. I stared at him, my jaw tight. You think that makes it better? No, he said softly. But you're fighting something bigger than both of us. I walked away before I said something I'd regret. That night, Rachel and I pored over every detail of the case in my living room. She was pacing, running through legal precedents under her breath. She's desperate, she said finally. They know if the deed holds up, they lose everything, so they're trying to bury you in doubt. I nodded. Then let's give them something real to choke on. She raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Proof. Hard proof that they built that dam illegally. Permits, contracts, anything that ties Victoria to the construction. Rachel smiled faintly. You're starting to sound like a lawyer. I'm starting to sound like a man who's had enough. The next morning, I drove out to the county archives, a dusty old building that smelled like old paper and rain. The clerk, an older gentleman named Frank, remembered me from years back. Looking for property files again, Dan? Yeah, I said. Anything on lakeside estates, specifically construction permits from the last 5 years. He disappeared in the back for nearly an hour before returning with the box of old files. You didn't hear this from me, but something's off about those permits. The HOA pushed them through fast, too fast. I spent the entire afternoon flipping through papers until I found it, the smoking gun. A construction permit for the dam, issued under the name Lakeside Maintenance Group, signed by Victoria Greer. But here's the kicker. The approval stamp was forged. You didn't need to be a handwriting expert to see it. The county seal was mismatched, and the signature from the zoning office was an obvious copy-paste. My heart trembled. I called Rachel. I found it. The permit's fake. There was a long silence on the line. Then her voice. Bring it to me. Right now. That night, as we sat in her office scanning copies, Rachel grinned for the first time in days. This is it. This could turn the entire case around. But before we could celebrate, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her smile faded. It's the court clerk, she said quietly. The HOA just filed an emergency injunction to freeze your assets. I stared at her. They're trying to bankrupt me before trial. She nodded grimly. They're scared, and that means we've got them cornered. When you push corrupt people into a corner, they do one of two things. They crumble or they come out swinging. Victoria Greer? She came out swinging. The morning after Rachel found the forged permit, my phone started blowing up. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and a text from an unknown number. You don't know what you're doing. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I showed it to Rachel as soon as I got to her office. She read it, sighed, and said, "They're panicking. That's good." I didn't feel good. I felt like I had a target on my back. We had enough evidence to destroy their case, but the HOA was desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. That afternoon, Rachel filed a motion to admit the forged permit into discovery. The clerk confirmed what we already knew. The signature from the county inspector wasn't real. We had them. But before the next hearing, Victoria made her move. It started with noise outside my cabin around midnight. I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, heart pounding, half expecting to see a raccoon. Instead, I saw 3 men wearing maintenance vests with the HOA logo stacking sandbags near the lake. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. One of them looked up. "Emergency flood control, sir." "There's no flood warning," I said. "You're trespassing." The man smirked. "HOA directive. We're reinforcing the bank before the next storm. Safety measure." I stepped closer, shining my light on the pile of sandbags. Behind them, a new trench had been dug, leading straight toward my cabin's foundation. It hit me. They weren't protecting the property. They were trying to weaken it. I pulled out my phone. "You've got 30 seconds to leave before I call the sheriff." They packed up fast. The next morning, I found a note nailed to my front door. No words, just a photo of my truck, the same one they claimed was seen near the dam. And on the back, scribbled in black marker, "This time, the lake takes everything." I handed the note to Rachel. She looked pale. "This isn't just a lawsuit anymore, Dan. They're trying to intimidate you." "I'm not backing down," I said. "Not after what they've done." She nodded. "Then we make this public." We called a local journalist Rachel knew from her early law days, a woman named Samantha Pierce, who specialized in exposing HOA corruption. Samantha came by that evening, camera in hand, recorder on. I told her everything, from the first fine over the lake's erosion to the fake permit. She listened intently, jotting down notes, her eyes hardening with every word. "This," she said finally, "is exactly the kind of story people need to hear." 2 days later, her article went live. HOA accused of forging county permit in $17 million lawsuit against local homeowner. And just like that, the tide turned. Within 24 hours, the HOA office was swarmed by reporters. Neighbors who'd once ignored me now stopped by to apologize. One even brought over a casserole and whispered, "We knew something wasn't right." Victoria went silent. No public statement, no response. But her lawyer, Keller, called Rachel demanding a private meeting. Rachel refused. If they want to talk, they can do it in court. The next hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, and it felt like the whole town showed up. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Cameras flashing, reporters whispering. Victoria sat at the HOA's table, perfectly composed, like she'd practiced for it. But when she saw the stack of evidence Rachel carried, photos, county documents, the forensic handwriting report, her jaw twitched. Rachel stood and began. Your Honor, we now have irrefutable proof that the HOA knowingly filed false documents in their case against my client, Mr. Tanner. The permit authorizing dam construction was forged, not only invalid but criminal. She placed the exhibit binder on the judge's desk. The courtroom fell silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Keller tried to recover, but Your Honor, it doesn't absolve Mr. Tanner of responsibility for the flood. Rachel smiled thinly. Actually, it does, because the lake and the dam were never legally approved, meaning the HOA, not my client, was solely liable for the damage caused by their unpermitted structure. She paused. And we have proof that the HOA redirected drainage pipes toward the lake to artificially raise water levels. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Rachel flipped the next page. A satellite photo showing new drainage lines leading directly from HOA common areas into the lake. Your Honor, this was done under the supervision of the HOA president, Mrs. Greer, without notifying the county. We also have invoices showing $48,000 in HOA funds used to pay a private contractor for that work. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Greer, do you have a response? Victoria didn't move. She stared straight ahead, eyes unfocused. Keller tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. Save it for closing statements. After recess, the real bombshell dropped. Samantha's news team had uncovered emails between Victoria and the contractor, messages where she explicitly ordered modifications to the lake's outflow system. The county inspector was called in for testimony. He confirmed it. That dam should have never existed. It was built illegally. The judge looked furious. This case has gone beyond civil dispute. We may be dealing with criminal fraud. Rachel leaned over to me and whispered, "She's done." As the court adjourned for the day, Victoria stood up suddenly and shouted, "You think you've won, Tanner? You destroyed this community." Everyone turned. I met her eyes and said quietly, "No, Victoria, you did." She stormed out, her heels echoing like gunshots down the marble hall. That evening, Rachel and I sat outside my cabin by the quiet, moonlit lake, the same lake that had once been my refuge, now calm again after months of chaos. She sipped her coffee. "You realize she might actually face prison time." "I don't want prison. I just want my name back." "You'll get that, and probably a settlement big enough to buy the HOA itself." I chuckled softly. "No thanks. I've had enough of neighbors for one lifetime." We both laughed, but underneath, I felt something deeper, relief mixed with exhaustion. Tomorrow the verdict would come, and for the first time in months, I was ready to face whatever came next. When the day of the verdict arrived, the courtroom was standing room only. Neighbors, reporters, even a few people from neighboring towns had come to see what would happen. The once untouchable HOA president, Victoria Greer, sat stone-faced at the defendant's table. Her lawyer looked like he hadn't slept in days. And me? I just wanted it to be over. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "You ready?" I nodded, though my hands were trembling. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. He took his seat, flipped through his notes, and cleared his throat. "After careful consideration," he began, "this court finds that the Homeowners Association of Lakewood Estates engaged in fraudulent misrepresentation, negligence, and malicious prosecution in their lawsuit against Mr. Daniel Tanner." He turned toward Victoria. "Furthermore, the HOA leadership knowingly submitted falsified documents to this court and the county, causing significant property damage and emotional distress to the defendant. Victoria's eyes darted toward her lawyer. The judge continued, "Therefore, the HOA is ordered to pay $3.2 million in compensatory damages to Mr. Tanner and an additional $1.5 million in punitive damages." Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Someone in the back whispered, "She's finished." Rachel reached over and gripped my hand. "You did it." I could barely breathe. "We did it." Then came the part that no one expected. The judge added, "As for Mrs. Greer, given the evidence of falsified permits and misuse of association funds, this court refers her conduct to the county prosecutor's office for criminal investigation." Victoria stood up. "That's ridiculous," she shouted. "You can't—" "Sit down, Mrs. Greer," the judge said sharply. She sat, shaking, her face flushed red. And that was it. Months of chaos, countless sleepless nights, thousands in legal fees, all leading to this single moment of vindication. When the gavel finally struck, I felt something inside me snap, not in anger, but in release. For the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe again. Rachel smiled and whispered, "You free." Outside, cameras waited like vultures. Reporters swarmed as we stepped out onto the courthouse steps. "Mr. Tanner, how do you feel?" one shouted. I paused for a moment, looking straight into the cameras. "I just hope this reminds every HOA out there that power has limits. You can't bully people into silence." Rachel squeezed my shoulder. "Well said." A week later, Samantha's follow-up story broke the internet. HOA loses $4.7 million case after framing homeowner for flood. President under investigation. The comments section was full of angry homeowners sharing their own horror stories. Apparently, Lakewood Estates wasn't the only place where power had gone unchecked. But justice came with scars. My cabin had suffered water damage that still needed repair. The lake, once my sanctuary, carried memories of betrayal. And every time it rained, I couldn't help but check the shoreline, just to make sure the water wasn't creeping higher again. Still, things were getting better. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now waved when they passed. A few even stopped by to apologize for believing the HOA's lies. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Rachel showed up with 2 beers and that same crooked smile. "You ever think you'll sell this place?" she asked. I shook my head. "Nah, it's mine. Every inch of it. I earned it." We sat there for a long time, listening to the frogs and the faint ripple of water. "You know," she said, "most people would have given up. Most people don't have you in your corner." I said, "Flattery doesn't get you free legal advice." Wasn't trying to. A month later, Victoria was arrested. Fraud, forgery, and misuse of HOA funds. The same HOA members who once voted her in now publicly disowned her. And for me, I started writing, not out of anger, but out of purpose. Samantha convinced me to publish a short piece about what happened, titled, "When the HOA Flooded My Life." It went viral overnight. Thousands of homeowners reached out saying they'd faced the same kind of abuse and intimidation. I realized then that maybe the fight wasn't just about a lake or a lawsuit. It was about standing up for the little guy. A few weeks later, Rachel and I stood on the dock at sunset. The light shimmered across the calm water, and for once, it felt peaceful again. "I can't believe it's finally over," I said. "It's not over," she replied. "You just turned the page." I looked out at the lake and smiled. Then I guess it's time for a new chapter. Sometimes the biggest battles we fight aren't about money or property. They're about truth. The HOA tried to bury me under false accusations and greed, but every lie they told only dug their own grave deeper. Standing by that lake today, I realized the justice doesn't come easy. It comes from persistence, faith, and refusing to let fear dictate your life. I lost friends, time, and peace along the way, but I gained something stronger, a voice that can't be silenced. And to anyone listening, never let anyone, no matter how powerful they seem, convince you that you don't have the right to stand your ground. Because sometimes one man and the truth can move mountains.